Hey students, we finally made it to the third video of our three-part series of working with the AWS Toolkit for Eclipse. In the first video, we installed and assigned permissions to a user account. We also configured the account as a profile in Eclipse. In the second video, we renamed the account and discussed adding and removing additional accounts. We also discussed the AWS Overview window and identified some useful buttons on the AWS Explorer View. All of this knowledge brings us to this video where we'll work with the S3 services in Eclipse using the AWS Explorer. If you watch this video in its entirety, you will be able to create a bucket in the AWS Management Console, add files and folders in the AWS Management Console, identify the requirements for viewing S3 buckets and objects in Eclipse, add and delete an S3 bucket through Eclipse, delete an S3 object through Eclipse, and explain why S3 objects can no longer be added directly through Eclipse. I know you're excited to wrap up the series and learn about S3 services, so let's get started. We'll start in the AWS Management Console. You'll notice I've already logged in with an account that has S3 full access permission. We want to create a bucket in S3 in the U.S. Northern Virginia region. First, I'll type S3 in the search box, then I'll click the S3 link in the search results. Currently, we have no buckets, so we are taken to a page that introduces the S3 service and provides a video and other useful links to help beginners get started. You'll notice to the top right, there's a box with the header Create a Bucket. The text in this box tells us that every object in S3 is stored in a bucket. To upload files and folders to S3, you'll need to create a bucket where the objects will be stored. We'll click the Create Bucket button beneath the text. And you'll notice we are taken to a page where we can create a bucket. First, we'll need to supply a bucket name, which is globally unique and contains no spaces or uppercase letters. In the bucket name box, we'll type demo.Professor Quinn.random stuff. Buckets are stored in AWS regions, so next we'll need to choose the region for our bucket. We're going to leave the U.S. East Northern Virginia region selected, but we'll need to remember where we've created our bucket to find it later. If we had already created a bucket and wanted to copy the bucket settings, we could select the Choose Bucket button. Since this is our first bucket, using an existing bucket is not an option for us. Next, we'll scroll down and we'll choose the object ownership. It is possible to have the objects in a bucket owned by AWS accounts other than the bucket owner. But for simplicity, we want all of the objects in our bucket to be owned by the account creating the bucket. We'll leave ACL's Disable selected and move to the next section, Block Public Access Settings for this bucket. Here we have the ability to grant public access so that anyone can access the bucket and any object within the bucket. If I deselect the Block All Public Access option, I have the ability to select individual settings within the public access to block. Selecting all four checkboxes is the same as selecting Block All Public Access. I'm going to select Block All Public Access and move on to bucket versioning. As you make changes to an object in a bucket and save these changes, you may wish to keep the previous copies of the object. If we select Enable, versioning is turned on, and previous object copies are maintained. For our purpose, we can leave bucket versioning disabled. Moving next to tags, we can track our bucket through the use of key value pairs. For example, if we want to be able to filter the bucket used for the demo, we could create a tag by clicking the Add Tag button and provide the key of bucket type and the value of demo. In the next section, we can encrypt the objects stored in our bucket by choosing Enable under the server-side encryption option. I'll leave this feature disabled like we did for versioning. Lastly, we have the ability to work with the advanced settings by clicking the arrow and making selections in this section. For our purpose in this demo, we'll leave the default option selected and click the Create Bucket button to create our bucket. You'll notice that we receive a message indicating that the bucket was successfully created at the top of the screen. Our bucket appears at the bottom of the screen with a few of the details that we selected being displayed. To open the bucket, we can click the link with the bucket's name. And AWS transports us to a page that shows us the bucket's contents, which is currently empty. We'll add objects by clicking the Upload button. And we are taken to a page where we can upload files and folders using a button or by dragging the files and folders onto the window. If we want to add a file, we click Add Files. Navigate to the appropriate folder, select the file, and choose Open. If we want to upload a folder along with the contents of the folder, we select Add Folder, navigate to the folder we wish to add, and choose Upload. You'll notice we receive a dialog box asking if we want to add all of the files from the folder. We'll click Upload again. Next, we'll add a file using the drag method. We can display our file exploring window, navigate to the file we wish to upload, and drag the file from the File Explorer to the Upload page. Then release the mouse. You'll notice the file appears in our Files and Folders list. The list that you see acts as a holding area. We have not uploaded the files yet. In order to complete the upload, we must select the Upload button at the bottom of the screen. It is extremely important to realize that if you do not click Upload, the files will not be uploaded to our bucket. Before we click Upload, I would like to point out that if we want to specify additional options, like public access, encryption settings, and more, we can access these options by clicking the Permissions and Properties arrow to reveal these sections. We'll leave the default permissions and properties and click Upload. We now see that our upload was successful. We'll close the status page, and we are returned to our bucket window. Notice that the files are listed with a folded paper icon and display the file type in the type column. The folders are listed with a folder icon and display the word folder in the type column. If we click a folder, we can see the contents of the folder just as we would in a file system. I can return to the bucket by clicking the link in the breadcrumb list. We now have an S3 bucket and objects within that bucket stored in the U.S. East Northern Virginia region. In order to have visibility to the S3 service in Eclipse, we need to have two things. First, we need to have an AWS account set up in Eclipse. This account must have S3 permissions that are appropriate to the activities you wish to perform. The account must also have programmatic access. Remember in the first video we created such an account with full access to S3. Second, we must have the appropriate region selected. The selected region corresponds to the location where the objects we wish to view are located. Minutes ago, we added our bucket to the US East Northern Virginia region. Let's return to Eclipse now and work with the bucket that we just created. If we return to Eclipse, we have our S3 full access account selected as the default account. We can check this by clicking the Kebab menu in the AWS Explorer, hovering the AWS account menu, and you'll notice the S3 full access account is the only account we currently have. It is the default account, and we know this because the default is displayed with a check mark beside it. We also have the US East Northern Virginia region selected where we created our bucket and objects. We can confirm this by selecting the region drop-down arrow, and you'll notice the US East Northern Virginia has a blue background, denoting that it is the currently selected region. If I wish to view the contents of S3 in the US East Northern Virginia region, I can click the arrow beside Amazon S3 in the AWS Explorer. And you'll notice I can see the bucket that I created called demo.professorquinn.randomstuff. If we want to add a new bucket, we can make this happen in Eclipse. We right-click Amazon S3 in the AWS Explorer and choose Create New Bucket. Again, following the naming conventions of no spaces and no uppercase letters, we'll create a globally unique bucket name. We'll type demo.professorquinn.morestuff. We'll click the Finish button, and the bucket appears under Amazon S3. We can switch to our browser to look at AWS. We can click the buckets link in the breadcrumbs at the top of the screen. And we find the bucket isn't there. No problem. Sometimes we need to refresh the list. We'll click the Refresh button, and the demo.professorquinn.morestuff bucket displays in AWS. Let's switch back to Eclipse. Next, we'll delete the demo.professorquinn.morestuff bucket. We can only delete empty buckets. Since we haven't added anything to our new bucket, we'll delete it by right-clicking on the bucket and choosing Delete Bucket. When prompted with the Delete Bucket dialog box, we can click Yes, and the bucket is deleted. Next, we'll look at the bucket that we created in the AWS Management Console called demo.professorquinn.stuff. If we double-click the bucket name, we can see the bucket contents display in the window to the right. By clicking the arrow beside the folder, we can see the folder expands and the contents of the folder are visible. If we right-click an object, we can see the shortcut list provides an option to delete the object. I'll choose Delete Object and click Yes to confirm. And the object is deleted. Just like we did with adding the bucket, we can confirm that the bucket has been deleted by navigating to our browser and viewing the bucket's contents. Again, I can click the Refresh button and view the change. Be advised that the functionality to interact with AWS through Eclipse was developed to work with Java version 8. Later versions of Java do not support some of the earlier Java APIs that were used. As a result, we can't work with some of the features like adding objects and editing permissions. For example, if we try to use the object listing and drag and drop local files to the table view to upload them to an S3 bucket, we're presented with a JAXB exception. This is because this API was removed after Java version 10. I'm currently using Java version 17. Be advised that some versions of Eclipse will not work with an earlier version of Java, so you'll need to use an earlier version of Eclipse as well. Rather than reloading software with older versions, I'd recommend you make your life easy and just use the AWS Management Console when you need to add objects. I hate ending a video on an error, but I thought you should know about this loss of functionality so you don't think that the problem is unique to your machine. Well, congratulations! You've made it through the 3-part video series on working with the AWS Toolkit for Eclipse. In this video, we created a bucket and added files and folders in the AWS Management Console. We identified the requirements for viewing S3 objects in Eclipse. We added and deleted S3 buckets and deleted an S3 object through Eclipse. And we explained why objects can no longer be added to S3 directly through Eclipse. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope you found this information valuable and enlightening.